and power would pass from Westminster, from the House of Commons, to all parts of the United Kingdom. So that's the answer that the Liberal Democrats would have, and I believe we're the only party that's got a thorough, workable, sensible answer to the West Lothian question. However, you ask about the reason it's back in the headlines, and I don't think it's because of the SNP. I think it's because of David Cameron and the Conservatives, but it's principally because of the new Prime Minister, Gordon Brown. And because Gordon Brown is Scottish, David Cameron realises that there is the potential there for a weak flank where he can stir up the concern, the anger of the little Englander kind of voter, and trying to gain votes, trying to gain political advantage out of that. But I think it's a dangerous ploy. It's a dangerous ploy to do that. I don't like the little Scotlander any more than I like the little Englander mentality. And playing to that mentality, I think, is bad politics. But also the answer that Malcolm Rifkin seems to have masterminded of forming an English Grand Committee and only allowing English MPs to be on that committee and only allowing English MPs to vote on and take decisions on the future of the English health service. It doesn't solve the problem, does it? Because if you think it through, you can have an English Grand Committee that has, for example, a Conservative majority on it, but you would have a UK government, a UK Parliament that would have a Labour majority. And you can imagine the clashes that would occur between this Grand Committee and the House of Commons itself, the full House of Commons. And at the end of the day, unless you change the constitutional settlement, you cannot take away the constitutional sovereignty of the House of Commons. It's only when you change the system and devolve power around England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland that you get a true federal system that could work. Yeah?
I have a question about Europe. Obviously, one of the big problems facing the European Parliament is low border turnout, particularly in countries like the UK. As a representative of a very pro-Europe party, what do you think can be done to increase awareness about the EU in Scotland and throughout the country?
Well, I think a central part of the answer to that relates to disillusionment and a sense of disengagement. And I guess if that would sum up what I was saying earlier about young people and the attitude of young people to voting, you can make an exactly similar point about the attitude of the general population to the European Parliament. The European cause, I think, is the noble cause that I spoke about earlier, to rid the European nations of war and hunger, and to achieve the level of integration that has been achieved over the period of the last 50 years or so through the EU, I think is a great achievement. And I'm an internationalist, and I believe in the European institutions. Yet the Europe that we read about in the press, the Europe that I see, because I've been to I've attended Council of Ministers meetings, I've been part of the European institutions, it can be hugely bureaucratic, very turgid and boring meetings, very complex in terms of the language, the dense, complex, difficult to understand language, and quite distant from local people. You know, how many people feel that their MEP, a member of the European Parliament, makes a real difference to their lives, to their community? And all of that has led to a sense of distance and disillusionment. And I think we've got to try and turn that around to give real relevance. And I think part of that would be giving more power to the European Parliament. It used to be a completely powerless, toothless body. I do think that in some of these areas that we're talking about, to do with environmental action, to do with some of the harmonisation of rules, it can make a real difference in terms of allowing students to study in different countries, people to work in different countries. Europe is really important to the future, and I think Europe can make a big difference on the big issues of the day. Some very sensitive talks going on at the moment with Iran in terms of nuclear disarmament, the Americans introducing sanctions. I think Europe can be an honest broker in a way that the US, and sadly to some extent Britain of course, is tainted by this with the events of the last few years, but in a way that the US as the superpower of early part of the 21st century will never be able to do. So Europe is really important, and we've got to make it more relevant, try to make it a bit more interesting and exciting, and let people know just how important it is.
If I may follow up.
When I come back. Sure.
Should the Reform Treaty go to a referendum then?
Well, I'm not always the greatest supporter of referendums, and my view is that there is a case for a referendum on issues of constitutional importance, where a government supports those constitutional changes and believes that they are of such importance that they need that extra endorsement, not only of the government or the parliament of the day, but also of the people. And I believe, depending on the outcome of the discussions, that could be the case here, but it looks increasingly as if the issues will not be as significant as first thought. I think the jury is out on that. The negotiations are still ongoing. But I do think that referendums should be used sparingly, and I don't support referendums on lots of different issues on an ad hoc basis. Yeah.
You refer to yourself as not a particular supporter of the idea of referendums. I wonder how you feel about the allegation that has been made in some quarters that your opposition to a referendum of some sort on Scottish independence, and including other questions possibly, marks the Liberal Democratic Party out as neither liberal nor democratic.
Well, I would refute that for the reason that I've just given. It's very, very rare. I would say it would be unique for a party, a government, to support a referendum on an issue that it doesn't believe in. And I don't believe in separation. I don't believe in independence. So for that reason alone, I would disagree with the idea that there should be a referendum. But I also think it would be very unsettling for Scotland. It would turn into a never-ending. I think you would get repeated referendums on the issue of independence. And Scotland would be marked out, a bit like Quebec, as a nation, as a part of the world where there was continuing constitutional uncertainty and debate. I would much rather have the sort of situation that's been achieved, for example, in Barcelona, in Catalonia, where the nationalists there have seen a big transfer of powers over the years to Catalonia from Madrid. But there's never been a referendum on independence. They're a nationalist party, but they are content with developing the strength and the powers of their parliament, of their region. And that's what I support as Liberal Democrats. I want to see powers devolve, decentralised. I want to see decisions taken as close to local people and local communities as possible. And I would like to see more powers for the Scottish Parliament, but not separation.
Yes, so essentially your proposition is you reject it because you reject the idea of independence. But from the example of the last question I mentioned about Europe, the Tories are broadly anti-European but want a referendum, so the result will be a rejection of that treaty. So so essentially you want to be, as a representative, to have the keys and total control of the constitutional position of the UK. You're unwilling to accept voters can legitimately express their viewpoint on it because you...
I think there is a democratic difference, and the democratic difference is twofold. The first is that the Scottish Parliament is elected by proportional representation, so it does reflect the political balance, it does reflect the views of the voters in a general election. And the second point is that round about 70% of the parties that people voted for in the election back in May are opposed to independence. So the view of the people of Scotland is pretty clear cut. And indeed, I think the latest research from the elections just being published today suggests that about 23% of voters in Scotland want to see an independent Scotland. 23%. So the support of the SNP